Spanish. Primero agradecer mucho la presencia del padre Abad, Philip Anderson, que como sabéis soy discípulo de John Senior, que es un poco la razón por la que hemos organizado esto. Hace escaso un año montábamos el grupo y hace escasos 7 meses empezábamos el curso, con la ayuda del profesor Antuñano que nos acompaña hoy, y con la presencia de los padres, bueno, el padre Federico, padre que nos acompañamos aquella vez, el padre José Ignacio, el padre Miguel, en la misma inauguración que tuvimos, que estuvo aquí en el Valle. Y la senda que hemos recorrido desde entonces, pues por ahora ha sido muy fructífera. Yo creo que es una señal de providencia que podamos contar con el Padre Abad, una gracia de Dios, sobre todo de nuestra Madre en el mes de mayo. Hoy es un día bastante especial porque podemos estar muy poquitos. Mañana pues no habrá ocasión de hacer preguntas, no habrá ocasión de hablar con el Padre Abad. Hoy es la ocasión que tenemos los que sí nos comprometimos a hacer el curso, a poder hablar con él, a poder discurrir. Una pregunta práctica primero. Si alguno no puede preguntar en inglés, no pasa nada, traduzco yo lo que haga falta. Y sobre todo en las preguntas sí intentaré traducir al español por los que no entiendan inglés, que no se queden perdidos. Pero sin más preámbulo, agradecemos, we'll thank the Father Abbot for his presence, and let's proceed without further ado with the conference.
Well, como feliz soy. What a joy it is for me to be here and see you gathered together in this blessed place, in spiritual memory and prayer. Oh,
they have translation.
So I see. The Abadía de Santa Cruz de los Caídos, I think Father Prior, here, for its warm hospitality, your young faces remind me of my time as a student at the University of Kansas, but that was untold ages ago. Different millennium, it was a different century. I only wish I could speak your beautiful Spanish or Castilian tongue, but we will have to do our best. It's too bad, que lástima. We cannot all speak Latin. Molto bene. Anyway, when historia of the historia, when in 1995 a reunion brought together 3 aging professors and some 150 of their former students of the Integrated Humanities Program at the university, a telling, precious moment occurred. One of the events planned for this reunion, reunion.
Reunión, sí. No reunión, más bien.
One of the events planned was a lecture, just like the ones that took place in the 70s. This is in 1990, but the classes were in the 1970s, as if perhaps the experience of the former days could be renewed. A fitting place was found, and all gathered there at the appointed moment. Professors, 3 professors, John Senior, Dennis Quinn, took 3 chairs, and we sat to give lectures at the front of the room, just as they had done several times per week when they taught the Integrated Humanities Program once upon a time in the 70s. So at the reunion, we have a lecture. The 3 old friends, the old professors, sat there for a moment, gazing at their former students, class. They didn't teach with papers. They knew their subject, and they would teach like this without a book and papers. So they were looking at their students, former students, alumni, as we say in English, alumni of Pearson College. Now, in the 1990s, men and women marked by experience. They were older, married, most were married, full of responsibilities and crosses that middle age brings with it, with fond memories of their time in the program, the Pearson College program. So the professors looked at the scene, these young people who now were middle age, scanning the many faces, and in turn the alumni pondered, the students also pondered their old professors. It was John Senior who at last broke the silence, uttering the words that brought down the house, expression idiomatica, émotion, grande émotion, brought down the house. As we were saying the last time, he said, 20 years later, and that was truly it. It was really that. The Pearson program had been one long conversation, a dialogue of hearts and minds around the great classics of world literature, something that never really ends. It's a dialogue that continues, it's something that goes through the centuries, towards eternity. And the same conversation, that's the title of these remarks, is The Great Conversation. It's still open to anyone, to you, who cares to take it up in 2019 as in 1971. Is this not an interesting idea? Interesting idea that somehow there really is a thread, fil, as they say in French, a thread of conversation running through all of what we call Western civilization. How do you see that in Spanish? Western
Civilización occidental.
occidental. In unity, something common going through all this. About the best that has been thought and said is what English historians say. This is about the best things that have ever thought or said Western civilization. A dialogue which has already lasted 2.5 millennia. Isn't this an interesting idea? It is as if Socrates, we say English, Socrates. Sometimes I slip back into French. I spend much more in French. As if Socrates were speaking with Shakespeare, Herodotus was the father of history, trading stories with St. Augustine, Cicero, maybe, vying in rhetorical skill with Cervantes. They all are having a conversation, you might say. We might listen to Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar speaking of El Cid to Chaucer, English poet who was in Westminster Abbey. I saw his grave some time ago. Perhaps Jane Austen, the favorite of Natalia. I don't know why, the women, they like Jane Austen. Perhaps Jane Austen would speak with Miss Prim, that modern woman, who's trying to understand life. She's trying to understand things. But most of all, what if we, men and women gathered here, all of you in particular, the young ones, jóvenes, were to enter into the sublime and most beautiful conversation? I think this is precisely what you are endeavoring to accomplish, you should be, with this course of studies that you've entered into with Ramon. Small group, Pusilix Rex, in the Gospel, it's a small herd of sheep. It can be very important because quality is more important than quantity in this conversation. I must add that the Benedictine monks, monje, to which I belong, to which this monastery, they all have engaged in this great conversation in their own way for many centuries. They really have done this very much, the monks. In all truth, a university, where many of you are studying or have studied, a university, universidad, is supposed to be, following its very name, the Latin etymology, universus, a turning towards. University should be a kind of turning towards, everyone turning towards a certain unity, truth, wisdom. Also at the heart of these two words, university and conversation, there's a common Latin root, versatio, university, conversatio, coming together, something in our day, meaning something like a turning toward a higher place of studies. So a university is not supposed to be, but is in our day very often, Madrid, New York, more of a multiversity, turning in many directions. Hold up. Pagina segunda. Bien, parce que we're on pagina segunda. Pagina Segunda?
Segunda.
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 And maybe we'll have máquina terza. Más tarde. 4 and 5. But what are they getting? Just page 2?
No, we are still on the top of page 1. The beginning of the top, we have page 1. This is page 2 and 3. No, no.
I see. You have different pagination than I
Yes,
have.
we do have different pages. I guess the translation.
What I have given so far is what they, do they have this text?
Yes, yes, yes. I guess John Cena didn't get interrupted.
But John Sr. told about this, he said, it's a máquina diabólica. Machines, you know, it's trouble. But we have to we use them, that's okay. But you should never be too intent upon machines. Never be count on them too much.
Le pregunto que si John Senior era interrumpido y hace referencia a lo que John Senior decía sobre las máquinas, diabólicas máquinas, que hay que usarlas, pero nunca dependamos de ellas.
So, muy importante. So, anyway, a university should be a university, not a multiversity. I might add another comparison, the fact that our monastic terminology, traditional word to describe monastic life, you have this in this text? Monastic life in the language of monks is conversatio. Isn't that funny? What they call the life, monastic life with vows, everything, conversatio. It's kind of, because you're conversing with God, I suppose. And it's the same, has the same meaning almost as conversio. Like you convert, like St. Ignatius, convert to the faith, you know? The two words are very much the same in Latin, Old Latin, Ecclesiastic Latin. Conversation, in the best sense, in fact, is a certain manner, kind of conversion. It is a kind of conversion. A conversation with high ideas and good things. It's a kind of conversion. Turning towards, with others, contigo, with others, you turn towards the good, the true, the beautiful. You use these transcendent ideas which are part of the certain unity, attributes of the divine, they're attributes of God. Already, before even evoking the Christian faith, before we talk about Christian God, a very great conversation and a great conversion or turning toward noble realities can be entered into on a natural level, human life. Before we even consider the question of divine revelation, there's already in the history of the world a conversation. In effect, as you may well know, the poet Dante, in his masterpiece, The Divine Comedy, presents us with an astonishing discovery in the first circle, Inferno. Inferno is hell, not too good, but in the upper part, this is the limbo of the just pagans, unbaptized, not Christians, who dwell in this place, crowned by a beautiful castle, where the poets, philosophers, and other great persons from pre-Christian antiquity dwell in peace. Virgil, Homer. They have no torment in this upper part of hell, according to Dante, saving the exclusion they suffer from the beatific vision of God. Virgil, Dante's guide through the underworld, explains to his protégé, that's French, protegato, that he too, Virgil says to Dante, he too belongs to this place with the others, without hope, we ever live and long. So they have the truth, they can, like philosophers on earth, they can talk about the truth, but they have no hope, in Dante's vision, of ever reaching heaven. This is really the lacrimae rerum, a famous expression of Virgil in the Aeneid. de Virgil toste lacrimere de lacrime de cosas, res. In any case, as Christians, however, we have access to an incomparably greater conversation. We can come into a greater conversation, one that includes the supernatural reference to divine revelation, the highest possible source of knowledge, this side of heaven. Not only are we able to open the pages of the Bible, both in its Old and New Testament, but we have a very abundant literature of commentaries on these inspired pages by a host of saints such as St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, and those beautiful saints who walked the land of Spain, including several doctors of the church, among them St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila. I think for you, it's not in my text, I think for you, they're so well known that you don't see them. They're so close that you almost don't see them.
Para nosotros Santa Teresa y San Juan de la Cruz son tan cercanos que hasta que ni los vemos. Puede pasarnos eso.
Chesterton, you know Chesterton, said, a man can be blind before anything,
Chesterton dice que un hombre puede estar ciego ante cualquier cosa,
provided it's big enough.
dado que sea lo suficientemente grande.
Things are so obvious we don't see it.
Tan obvio que no podemos verlo.
But you have these great saints which we see from America and also we really admire very
Grandes
much.
santos que vemos desde América y admiramos que nosotros podemos ver.
In any case, all of this literature, though written perhaps many centuries ago, is not a mere collection of fossils from the past, but is brimming full of the philosophy, poetry of hearts on fire with sublime love. Now, is everybody following the text, or some lost?
¿Alguien está perdido en el texto? ¿Se sigue bien? ¿Alguien no es? O sea...
Muy inteligentes. To summarize here, and say a little differently what I've been trying to communicate, I affirm that there is a unity of knowledge of the truth, a unified architecture of ideas that has built our Western culture, and in fact includes, in the end, the sum of wisdom of all ages and places, assuming into its unity the wisdom of the best of the cultural patrimonies of the entire world, under the sign of Christ, the King, Christo Rey, Lord of heaven and earth. This is also to say that we are called to leave behind now what the Greek philosopher Plato, through the mouth of Socrates, called the unexamined life. We shouldn't live a life unexamined, like animals, without knowing who we are and what we're doing. We should leave that behind. We should know what we do. We should leave behind that sort of pointless human life that cannot account for its own existence in any way, a blind life in the brain, human beings without light. No, we are called to a higher plane of existence. This begins with the great conversation. The great spiritual characteristic of this conversation is something philosophers, theologians, and poets often call the wonder, the beginning, admiratio. Wonder, admiration. We shall return to that concept if you don't all fall asleep. If you all fall asleep, go away. But now, I can tell your thoughts. I know. Do we still have this phone in the text?
Yes. Second page.
I am speaking to young people of the 21st century. No, 21st century. This is serious. You deal every day with the spirit of the world, with a worldview that is diametrically opposed to the one I've attempted to sketch, broad outlines with my clumsy brushstrokes. Contemporary world, absolutely not. No. No, the critics, you think, will not let this monk get away with such fanciful stuff. The objection is nothing new. It's not new. It's been more or less concomitant all the time with the conversation. In Plato's Republic, Socrates is contradicted without mercy by the sophist Thrasymachus, who makes great sport of the idea that there would be such a thing as justice or truth in the sense that we have been taking here. So, no. America and in Spain, no, we will not accept this idea of unity and everything. Socrates faced the opposition of the sophists, they called in those days. Sophists could write, I'm out of text here, sophists could write a discourse for you to prove one thing or the opposite. You pay him enough, and the truth makes a difference.
Un sofista podía escribir un discurso, podía poner un lado o el otro, dependiendo de cuánto le pagaras, podría hacerlo exactamente sin razonar.
Truth, quid est veritas, suppos Pilato, you know.
Que es la verdad, Pilato.
The Lord Jesus, the Lord, centuries later, faced the grim, determined criticism of the Pharisees and Sadducees. In our day, the spirit of critical dismissal of truth is everywhere. It's taken over the world. Hermano Google. It's taken over the world like a host of evil windmills. Cuando llegué a España ayer, vi muchos molinos de viento, gigantes, que son gigantes malvados, como ustedes saben. Windmills, now they're bigger than ever. Maybe there's some good. Anyway, the critics taking over. One cannot get away in public almost with bold affirmations of the good, the true, and the beautiful, or so it seems. According to Professor Dennis Quinn, amigo mío, he's dead now, he spent much of his life doing research on the topic of wonder. He studied mostly in Spain. He came often to libraries in Spain to study, follows the church, everything about the history of the sentiment of wonder, which Aristotle talks about, and Socrates.
Dennis Quinn, amigo suyo que ya murió, venía mucho a España precisamente a estudiar el concepto de asombro en Aristóteles.
So according to Dennis Quinn, Dionysius Quinn, this critical mentality which reigns today can be thus described, and I give a quote from his book, which is a little bit learned, expert in this. He says, the critical mentality is perhaps the habit of mind that best qualifies as the very antithesis of wonder. It's the contrary of wonder. The critic is sophisticated, while the wanderer is naive, full of trust, credulous, simple. The critic is William James, American philosopher, tough-minded person who delights in debunking what others hold in admiration. Oh, that's nothing. The étoiles, is gases, nothing really. Who holds himself to be superior to the objects of his scrutiny, whether it be Mozart or the cosmos, and who demands that everything be proved with no authority trusted except his own. Criticism is now virtuously synonymous with skepticism. For the critical mind, the defendant is considered guilty until proven innocent. There can be no getting around this major dominance of the critical spirit in our epoch. It become the universal principle of political correctness. You heard of this in Spain.
Corrección política. Yes, it's quite a...
We run out of text?
Yes, no, I'm going to give the father one example.
I see. And it animates the ideologies that powerfully inspire in our day what Pope Benedict once called the dictatorship of relativism. If you're unsure of what that means, just look around you in modern Spain. You will see it here and elsewhere in the circles of the most influential people. Madrid, más importantes. So, what is to be done? Must the great conversation come to an end? Is wonder dead? Is the truth a mere illusion? What do we do? Now maybe Ramon comes back. We should see if there are any important questions already, or should I continue? But he disappeared now.
Ramón,
Do you think we should stop now and have some questions, or should I just try to continue? I have a bit more.
Well, I think we can continue.
Continue.
Yes.
Continue. Muy bien. Okay, now, at this point, in a typical disputation, if we are arguing about ideas, university, medieval university, example, about truth, this is where the medieval theologian St. Thomas Aquinas comes forth with a sed contra, argument from authority that refutes the objection. This is the method employed in the Summa Theologica, which your students heard. In our present discussion, the sed contra might be about what can effectively push back the concerted efforts of the sophists and Pharisees of our own time to eradicate from the hearts and minds of mankind the light of truth. What would be the sed contra here? Only to refute the idea that there's no love, there's no God, there's nothing true. The authoritative counter-arguments that serve to refute the tenets of the dictatorship of Marxism, or if you will, of modernism, St. Pius X said, are many arguments. The most impossible ideology is relativism, or atheism, agnosticism. It's an impossible philosophy, absolutely lame. It doesn't have. It's very easy to refute, and there are many refutations. But anyway, here's what I was saying. Yes.
Las filosofías más sencillas, o sea, las más burdas y las que no se pueden llamarse filosofías son el ateísmo, el agnosticismo y el relativismo. Y hay múltiples refutaciones de esas.
So, to contradict this, the first thing is common sense. I don't know what you have in Spain, but I'm sure you have common sense. We call it, what do you call it?
Sentido común.
You keep your feet on the ground, and we know which way is the north or which way is the east, and many modern, they don't know. I don't know. There was a conversation recently in the American University about abortion, and a teacher said, if a baby who was to be aborted is born, should we take care of it? And the student said no. Conversation in Madrid University.
Una conversación en una universidad moderna americana en la que se discutía sobre el aborto y un profesor preguntó si un bebé que debía ser abortado al final nace, deberíamos cuidarlo, deberíamos hacernos cargo de él, y los alumnos contestaron que no.
And the professor said, ¿por qué? ¿Por qué? And the estudiante said, porque no es infant. No, it's not a baby. It's not a baby. Or why it's not a baby? Because the doctors said it would be an abortion, so it's not a human life. So with a baby there, I'm sure that the student would take care of the baby if she saw it. But in the mind, you lost common sense. I mean, absolute, incredible lost common sense.
Le preguntó el profesor por qué no había que hacerse cargo de él, y la estudiante dijo que porque no era un bebé, y le preguntó cómo no va a ser un bebé si está ahí enfrente tuyo. Y dijo porque si los médicos han dicho que se podía abortar, entonces no, es un bebé. Entonces el padre dice que supone que si la mujer viera al bebé en la realidad, por supuesto sería cargo, pero que en sus mentes, en las mentes de mucha gente, no existe el sentido común, no existe la mínima relación con la realidad.
Because that student was completely serious. She was an adult student who was completely serious.
Sí, era una estudiante adulta, obviamente seria.
Ay, caramba. So, common sense, powerful. John Senior would remind students to learn, you have to go out in the country, you have to see, you have to walk in the country, you have to do things, you have to do sports or walk, or you have to see the stars, you have to get away from computers, because we didn't have computers in us too much, or television. You have to come back to common sense. It's very helpful when you feel bad. You get away from too much artificial things and get back to common sense.
John Senior decía que les invitaba a sus alumnos a ir al campo, a hacer deporte o a andar o a lo que fuera, con tal de retirarse de lo artificial, en aquel momento no tenían ordenadores, pero de las televisiones, porque es la reconexión con el sentido común, que es muy importante para huir de lo artificial.
So, having one's very being grounded in the natural law, as they say, the solid ground of reality is the most precious way to begin. And many, as I say, many children now don't benefit from this because they're taught in schools sort of crazy ideas. Belief in God, the credo, even more important, much more important, rebuttal of the modern critics, at least for those who consider themselves Christians. Agnosticism and atheism, what we call in America our liberals, liberales, is really a hopeless position. When you study this with a little bit of serenity intellectually, their position is just, but they have power, they have influence, but it's impossible. But I want to provide a very concrete set contra, a very down-to-earth reason why the enemies of the great conversation, why, will be defeated. This is not really a set contra of authority, but an argument, powerful, I think. The proof is the very fact that you are here today. Because likewise, all over America, little projects like yours are beginning to pop up, to begin. Return to the study of the classics. Many schools are going back to this. I hear about every few days I hear of a new college, institute, and people are going back to this sort of thing. Sometimes it has to do with the cultural legacy of my old mentor, John Senior, but this is not just about his teaching, not just about John Senior. Most modern education is disaster area. The professors, they know they want to help students, but there's a problem, especially in many schools. The new generations are not learning very much, but they have unprecedented access to knowledge. They know very much. You people know much more than my generation. You know because of computer, because of modern means of communication. So this is to say that young people, though they know much more, are less and less educated in the sense, ancient sense of education. Less and less able to see the forest for the trees. Do you understand? This is Spain.
More or less similar, yes.
In other words, I can see details, but I can't see what the unity is, what it's all about. I see this book, I see this arbor, but I don't see the forest. Whereas the Western culture is a kind of a unity, it points to God, you see.
I don't see that part. La frase, ver el bosque por los árboles, en español es similar. Dice el abad que es parte del problema de la educación actual, que se ven los detalles, se ven pequeños destellos, o se ve este o este otro libro, este o este otro árbol, si lo han dicho, pero no la gente es incapaz de ver el bosque, de ver el conjunto, que precisamente es de lo que la civilización, de lo que la civilización occidental, en lo que la civilización occidental consiste, en ver el conjunto.
On the contrary, young people are being used by profit seekers, people who want money, internet and elsewhere. They're taking advantage. And you're becoming victims of the new sophists, selling what several popes have called culture of death, culture of artificial contraception, abortion, euthanasia. But you can only fool the young people so long. After a while, they begin to understand. They back off. They begin to understand. And many are beginning to call for their true cultural inheritance, the rightful heritage. This reaction against the world is quixotesco. In a real way, a tilting, the caballero, tilting at windmills, but it's not insane. Don Quixote, poco in a cabeza loco, pero John Senior, he saw in Don Quixote a certain sense of a wisdom of actually fighting just what people all say to get back to some kind of truth. There's a kind of image there that he used is a sort of superior wisdom in this man who was a fool.
Don Quijote, que puede ser el loco, sin embargo John Senior veía en él el símbolo de el que lucha con una sabiduría superior, que puede ser el tonto para el que lo ve, pero que es imagen de eso que es más grande que la mente humana.
So it's the modern world, or the postmodern world, if you use the expression postmodern, which is really kind of insane. Not, sometimes it's truly insane. They're being proposed in America. So we must not worry too much about the critics who would stop our great conversation to take the path of the skeptics, deniers of Western civilization, Christendom, to say that life is basically without meaning, absurd. Juan Paul stopped. But to affirm absurdity of human life does not provide an answer of anything. It doesn't help anything. Such an affirmation is the most absurd of all. In fact, there's no limiter to say there's no light. It doesn't provide any light. It's absolutely zero. Aristotle teaches us that man naturally desires to know. We expect that there to be a truth, and that is not just fragmentary and relative. There's a kind of proof of the existence of God in this, the need of man to find something else than he finds just in the world. The natural desire, nothing in the world completely fulfills that desire. A really important thing. Money, power, marriage, pleasure, these are tremendous things, but they just do not. So, there's God. There's a kind of proof there. You could find a proof. St. Thomas Aquinas. This is very intellectual. Weak profundo. I don't know if I should. I don't have the text here, but this is very. It says that we have, all of us, have an habitual knowledge, not actual knowledge, but it's sort of habitual knowledge. Like I have an habitual knowledge that my soul is there, but I don't actually think of that. I have an habitual knowledge. We have an habitual knowledge of the very act of being that makes us exist. We have a certain habitual knowledge of God. That's what he says. Now that's not cast of faith. Other theologians or philosophers would deny that, but he says that's very profound. In fact, it does make sense. It does make sense that there is a unity and purpose to these 100 volumes we call the Greek books. You understand? You know about the Greek books?
It's an American idea, but yes, we know it.
Great books, or what John Cena called the 1,000 good books. It makes sense. So, are they hungry now? Hungry?
Not yet. In Spain, it's not even time for.
Not even time for lunch.
No. Loads of time for lunch.
No, but my discourse is not infinite. It does have a limit, so don't worry.
Don't worry. There's questions after.
But now we climb to a bit of a higher level. It's probably the highest level here. So the Great Conversation is summarized in this collection of amazing books, the great books, John Cena taught, But perhaps we should try to delve more deeply and take a few moments to seek what lies at the heart of all this literature. What, if there's a unity, what is the message at the heart? This is difficult because it's very important. Is there a particular central message? Well, if there is this unity to the conversation, despite the very great variety of authors, from Homer, Herodotus, Dostoevsky, whatever, great variety, times and manners, there must be a central point. There has to be some central truth. Now this may be going too fast, flying too high, Icarus, flying too high, but I see no better way to point towards the center of the conversation than to refer to the highest conversation ever had. I'm going to speak of the highest conversation has ever had, one that is eternal and divine. It's a saying, perhaps you know this, of St. John of the Cross. The Father spoke one word, so he's speaking this conversation, which was his Son, and this word, very important, it's a variable word. He always speaks in eternal silence, and in silence must be heard by the soul. So there's a spiritual teaching there, which the point here was a spiritual teaching, but he implies a conversation. And the Son is sort of the conversation with the Father. So,
shall I translate the last part?
you might, you think.
Esa palabra, esa idea de la cruz implica una conversación, lo hablábamos antes, y esa conversación implica una conexión diferente con Dios.
Fortunately for us, and this is just Christian faith, this word spoken by the Father eternally in contemplative silence was sent down to earth to us, incarnation. This is the message of the prologue of the Gospel. St. John, be calm. Text. The beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God, and the Word was made flesh, dwelt among us. They say, if all Scripture were destroyed, we only had the New Testament, that would be enough. And if all was destroyed but the Gospel of St. John, would still have sort of the essential. And if all was destroyed but the prologue of St. John, would still have sort of the essential of the faith. It's a very powerful nucleus of the whole.
Se dice que si perdiéramos todas las Sagradas Escrituras, pero conserváramos el Nuevo Testamento, sería suficiente. Si perdiéramos todo el Nuevo Testamento, salvo el Evangelio de San Juan, todavía sería suficiente. Pero si perdiéramos todo el Evangelio de San Juan, salvo el prólogo, es un núcleo tan poderoso, tan potente, que ahí puede incluso encontrarse resumir a la fe.
So this incarnate Word, not the Word of God, but incarnate, is the center of all the words in all the books of the great conversation. At the center of Holy Scripture is the written Word in its highest expression. Even Plato was a kind of preparation for the fathers of the church. He was a preparation for the gospel. Aristotle, they prepared. And even authors who are not very Christian, but have something to say, some French literature, they will say something, they'll be anti-Christian, Voltaire or somebody, but they'll say some things very true. They add something to the conversation, even though they sort of lost the center.
Shall I say that?
Yes.
Platón y Aristóteles ya añaden a la conversación desde antes del cristianismo, preparan a los padres, pero es que incluso hay en la conversación las voces discordantes, incluso en la literatura francesa, poniendo el ejemplo de Voltaire, aquellos que hablan contra el cristianismo, sin embargo, también aportan a la conversación, también dan ese punto, aunque hayan perdido el centro de la conversación.
And so this divine word is not just a nice idea, it's an idea, kind of logos, kind of idea, logic, logos. Not just a nice idea though, but reality that moves the heavens and earth. All of us, in the depths of our being, are moved by this. Let us listen to what St. Bernard of Clairvaux, the great medieval monk, said about the realism of the Word incarnate. I got this text from Natalia San Martin, who sent this to me. I had not known it before. This is our monastery, Clepic. It's dedicated to Nuestra Señora de la Anunciación. So St. Bernard really was part of this conversation. Let it be done to me, this is the Blessed Virgin Mary saying to God, let it be done to me concerning the Word, according to your Word. May the Word who was in the beginning, was with God, prologue of St. John, become flesh in my flesh, according to your Word. I beg that the Word be to me not a word which once pronounced fades away, but which conceived remains, clothed with flesh and not with air. Let it be to me a word not only audible to the ear, but visible to the eyes, one which hands can touch and arms carry. Let it not be to me a mere written, mute word, but one incarnate and living, that is to say, not a word scratched by a dumb signs on dead skins. In the old days they wrote on parchment, but one in human form, truly graven, lively within my chaste womb, not by the tracings of a dead pen, but by the markings of the Holy Spirit. And so, if literature is just a dead thing you study to get a doctorate, and you just sort of, go through to have power and money, whatever, it doesn't make a difference, but it should come back alive in the liturgy and the monastic life and the Catholic life. To come back sometime, we have to come back and realize the living power of it. And sometimes we fall asleep, like the Israelites in the Old Testament. They come to God and they fall away and they do bad things, and God comes back, reminds them.
Si la literatura es para nosotros un mero medio para sacarnos un doctorado, lo he dicho literalmente. Para sacar un doctorado, para ganar dinero, o poder, la literatura está siendo muerta. A veces nos recuerda, pensando en los grandes libros, que hay que volver al verdadero sentido, a que es algo vivo. Y lo mismo pasa pues con la liturgia, con la vida monástica, que a veces tenemos que volver a darnos cuenta de que eso está vivo. Nos pasa como a los israelitas, que nos quedamos dormidos y Dios tiene que volvernos a traer de vuelta a despertarnos.
So such is the heart and the summit of the great conversation, hastily sketched here. There is much more to it. We could talk for many years and centuries about this. You will never exhaust the content of this great conversation. You think you've seen it all, you read the books, and then you wait 20 years and you read the book again. It's like, I read the Odyssey, it's like a new experience. I see all sorts of new things because my life has changed, and I could read the same book later. The book becomes a friend that I can read, because its innermost secret place lies a word that is divine, that is infinite, because there's something infinite there. Human beings long for something, a love that's infinite, not just big, but infinite. In fact, as human beings created in the image and likeness of God, we have a certain capacity for the infinite, so we are never satisfied completely with anything finite in the world. Great conversation orients us towards an infinite truth. Once we have been for a moment to the center of the conversation, it's a delight to see how it expands outward to fill the universe with truth and beauty. This is the world of culture in its noblest sense. And so you come to the summit and then you see how it comes out in the world. This is what makes for human happiness along the way to heaven. Literature that you're studying is not Beatific vision. It's a ladder. It's a scala. I think Spain is kind of a scala mystica, really. It's kind of it's a culture. Its best culture is a kind of a leading, like San Juan de la Cruz talks about a secret staircase,
La literatura que leemos no es la visión beatífica, son los escalones de la escalera que lleva al cielo. E incluso dice el padre que España misma es una escala santa, esa escalera secreta de la que habla San Juan de la Cruz,
right,
que nos lleva hacia el cielo.
The great poet Homer, which is the first of the great books, really, usually the first of the great Homer, provides us with a marvelous description of what he calls the festive mood. So this is Odysseus, great hall, and Homer says, I feel that there is nothing more delightful than the festive mood reigns in a whole people's hearts. And the banqueters, that's what we're going to do in a few minutes when we get hungry. Listen to a minstrel from their seats in the hall, while the tables before them are laden with bread and meat, and a steward carries around the wine he has drawn from the bowl and fills their cups. Exactamente in refectorio monks. This is exactly this. No minstrel. This, to my thinking, is something very much like perfection. It's amazing. People are so looking for this kind of joy. I think the Spanish people are very understanding this. Italians, Americans, sort of. In the north, people are more serious with them. Have a sense of this. So the conversation is really more than reading. It's not just about reading. It involves music in the largest sense. The 9 muses, the daughters of memory. Greek word music comes from the Greek word muse. It involves feasts, especially wedding feasts. That's where you have the biggest feast, the wedding feast. At the very end of the Bible, in the great book of the Apocalypse, there is a question of the wedding feast of the Lamb. That's an amazing image. The Lamb is an image that goes from the Old Testament all through the Lamb, the Israelites, the Lamb of the Apocalypse. It's one of the images, the most amazing of the different senses of Scripture. It goes all through the Lamb. The wedding feast of the Lamb.
El Cordero y todo lo que representa la Escritura es la manifestación.
What is your favorite song? Oh, you've seen this. You should really answer. If someone asks you what's your favorite song, you can say the Song of Songs. It's the más importante, Song of Songs, the Canticle of Canticles. That's the greatest song. There too, the saints are found to be very eloquent. But the culture stemming from the incarnation of the Word embraces all that is good. There's the religious part. But really, this conversation embraces all that's good in human life. In every culture, especially in the great Catholic countries, such as Europe, you have the most superb culture that has ever existed. Other peoples might later. In Africa, you have the faith growing very much. Perhaps they will attain something like this, or in China. But so far, the European culture has really risen to heights that you haven't found elsewhere. You have an immense heritage, though it, as in so many places, has become a bit tarnished and dull. The gold becomes... You don't have any more?
Ramón dijo, you have the most superb culture. Eso traducirlo, importante.
We have the most pop culture. Yes, rock and roll. I know. I know. Very much, I know that, yes.
La nuestra es la tema occidental.
You have an immense, the gold, the culture is perhaps like gold. Sometimes it gets sort of tarnished. You have to put gold more on blazing or whatever. Let's see. Oh yes, last page. They still have pages?
They do. I hope.
This is a practical sense. One of John's great intuition was that the good teacher, this is important for you, the good teacher is to reach the students where they really are, their real life. Not where they're supposed to be. At university, you're supposed to have a certain level, but what if they're right here? You have to go to where they really are. He found that the university students, practically speaking, he saw the need to institute a kind of remedial course, those things older children used to learn before coming to the university. We students found it a bit astonishing at first. They want us to learn poetry. When he organized the learning of poetry, when he sent students out to gaze at the stars at night, when he suggested that these young men and women needed to experience true ballroom dancing, Pearson College, we thought this is crazy, but he understood we have to get back to certain arts and things that are common to the culture. The students in my day, it was Eric Clapton, it was rock and roll and stuff, but they learned to do true dancing as part of the Pearson College experience, and it worked. And people started to understand better life. Anyway, in his first book of the Metaphysics, Aristotle, the prince of those who know, according to Dante, explains that it was this experience of wonder that first led him into philosophy. That's when he first started. Why is there an eclipse? Or why the stars? And he began to wonder why. That's what started philosophy, the higher pursuit of truth. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, the great Cistercian monk of high Middle Ages, states in his De Consideratione that the first and greatest contemplation is that of wonder caused by majesty. The majesty of God, the majesty of creation causes wonder. You take nothing else with you today from this conference. Nothing else. Nada. It would suffice to remember that the point of studying the great books is not in the scholarly introductions and the footnotes. Now, the professores, they write many introductions and footnotes in books. That's good later, but first, read the book itself. Read the author, read Shakespeare, read Plato. Don't read the critics first, because then your view will already be sort of askance. This is important.
Los profesores, la enseñanza muchas veces hace críticas, hace introducciones, hace comentarios, pero no leáis eso primero, no leáis la introducción, la crítica primero, leed primero la obra, porque muchas veces el comentario, si se lee primero, opaca el impacto verdadero que tiene la obra.
Once you know the book, it's very interesting to learn more about the circumstances, but first, read, even if it seems to read the author himself.
Una vez se ha leído el libro, es muy interesante leer comentarios, pero primero, léase, entres en conversación con el autor.
In the beautiful message of the authors themselves, a message that is for you in your own life, something that should make you wonder at the world around you and lead you to look higher. The Russian novelist Dostoevsky wrote that beauty will save the world. Many authors have talked about this. It is that higher beauty that stimulates wonder, transforms human life under the oppression of divine grace. One of his great paintings, Blessed Fra Angelico, represents the Last Judgment to San Marco. I was there once. Amazing. Some painting is more beautiful in books than in the reality. But Fra Angelico, it's much more amazing in the true convent San Marco than the books. It's really amazing. There's a big tableau of the Last Judgment with Christ in glory towering over the graves of men and women that have been opened. Los Caídos is exactly like that. It's the graves here at the end of the world. The damned are led off to the Lord's left, to the torments of hell, and the blessed are invited to climb up on the right side to be greeted by the holy angels and saints. It's touching to see how the artist depicts the blessed spirits taking each good soul by the hand to lead it by the hand into the great round of dance that is underway. What a telling image, the ultimate meaning of music. The dance was one of the muses too. In Greek, I understand music was instrumental music and singing and history and dancing. What a telling image. Let's say of literature and of all the arts and sciences, this kind of round, blessed dance of Fra Angelico. all poetry that culminates in a great vision of eternity that is not just an intellectual view, but an experience, like Homer's festive mood, infinitely greater. But to say more about all this would be to say too much. So there's much more to share, but you will just have to continue this conversation. You've just begun. Even John Cena had just begun in his life. I mean, it's something that you, in the modern world, you get interested in something, and pretty soon it's finished, and you're tired of it. But with God, it's not the way it is. So I thank you very much for your kind attention. If we have time for questions, I'm ready to go all day, as long as you want. I'm ready to go.